Welcome to Being at Home with George during the time of COVID. I'm excited to be here today, and I'd like to talk about the state of things as they appear to be, as they seem to be to me. There's a lot going on. People aren't happy, and people are frustrated. Things seem to be out of control, and I think it's a good time to understand that when things are out of control, we need to focus on what we can control. And I'd like to read a quote here from a book by Eric Butterworth called Spiritual Economics. And he says, if you carefully search within yourself, you may come to the awareness that your most important asset is the conscious control of our own life. Nothing else can satisfy or fulfill unless you enjoy the freedom that comes from control of your inner world of mind and emotions. And I know this from my own experience from recovery and really taking on the serenity prayer. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And so in this context, and I'm doing it a little bit out of sequence here, but it's really important that I begin each session with this idea of embracing whatever comes up. In this case, it's things are out of control. There's things happening that we're not happy with. And we embrace it. We say yes to it. And at the same time, we generate the hope. And in this case, we talk about why is it important? It's important because when things are out of control, we need to focus on what we can control. And in this case, we're talking about generating hope. And it's this idea of conscious control, of focusing on the things, the courage to change the things we can, focusing on what we can change. And I talk about this a lot, about when there's no space between stimulus and response, we react to things. And that's when things are out of control, and they get more out of control because we don't have any conscious control. But when we can create space between stimulus and response, in that space, we have the freedom and power to choose. We get to interpret how we're going to relate to the situation. And in terms of how to, we have to train, we have to practice. This is something we have to engage in practice. And in this case, generating hope. And one way to generate hope is to create what we call the grateful heart. This is what Eric Butterworth talks about in his book. And it's something I've been experiencing for quite a long time. And so when I work with people, I talk about focusing on what we can control. And when I worked in a medical center in a stress reduction clinic, and one of my mentors and founder of the clinic, Jon Kabat-Zinn, is fond of saying, as long as your breathing is more right with you than what's wrong with you. And so we need to focus on what we can do. We can control our consciousness. And one of the things we can do is we could generate a grateful heart. And that is an attitude of gratitude. And I know this myself. And when I engage with people, whether it's a service call, if I'm having a challenging situation with my streaming service, or it could be anything, and I'm talking to an associate on the other line, and after I talk to them, I ask them, what's your name again? And they tell me their name, and I say, thanks for your service. I'm grateful for that. And so this idea of an attitude of gratitude, and it's not so much about things, it's about a consciousness. And so for me, I always talk about this idea of appreciating the non-toothache. And you don't really appreciate that until you have a toothache. But we can decide to appreciate the non-toothache, especially for me. I recently had a root canal, and today I had a lot of dental work done. And just being able to chew, being able to be aware of my lip and not being numb, those things we take for granted. There's people I know that are ill, or maybe they have COVID, or maybe they just have the flu, or maybe they're just not feeling well, or they've been diagnosed with some health issue that's very troubling. And the whole idea is being grateful for what we have and generating a grateful heart by just focusing on things that we can be grateful for. So I'm grateful for the idea that I can talk and we can have this engagement here. We're not living in a country where the lights are only on for several hours a day. We actually have 24/7, and we're able to be grateful for that. And it's important that we think about what we can control, and we control this, something happens, we can interpret it saying, okay, what's the lesson here? What is it that we can learn in this situation? And I'm recalling Viktor Frankl when he talks about the idea of unavoidable suffering, and that it's the attitude. We can choose our response to respond to that unavoidable suffering in a way that we find meaning in suffering. Like this, there's a lesson here. And when we find meaning in suffering, it ceases to be suffering. And so for me, I'm just grateful that I'm here and we're able to have this conversation and we can talk about things to be grateful for. And there's a practice that I encourage people to engage in that Shawn Achor talks about, the 5 research habits. And one of the research habits for cultivating happiness, which really decreases anxiety and depression, is to think about 3 new things to be grateful for each day. 3 new things in a 24-hour period, and to be grateful, and either write them down or speak out loud, say them out loud. One of the practices I have is what I call catching yourself with somebody else doing something right, and just encouraging people. And maybe it's a simple thing they do all the time, but thank you for your service. I appreciate that you got the benefits of your sustained effort, that you're getting something. It's not like, oh, you're a great person. Yeah, you are a great person, but I'm acknowledging your effort. You made a great effort and you got an outcome that's commendable, an outcome that you're satisfied with. And so we have to think about things in that way. And when I think about a grateful mind, and this is what I've been experiencing in my recovery, is this gratitude, being grateful and focusing on what I can control. And what happens, the science of mind is a grateful mind is a mind. This is a quote from Plato. A grateful mind is a great mind, which eventually attracts to itself great things. So think about that. If you want a great mind, you got to be grateful. And if we practice gratitude, we're actually cultivating a great mind. And if we have a great mind, we're actually going to attract greatness or great things to us. And that's been my experience. And I would say the rich get richer, because once we understand that these qualities of mind, that it's controlling our mind, controlling what we hold in mind. And I go back to that philosopher, Dr. Dre. I have my mind on money, money on my mind. If I have gratitude on my mind, I have my mind on gratitude. And as it says here, if I have a grateful mind, I'm going to have a great mind. If I have a great mind, I'm going to attract great things to me. So it's not like I have to go get anything. It's the consciousness of gratitude is creating a space for me to have access to the creative source, to the universe, to higher power, or what we like to talk about in my realm is the masterpiece within, that we have access to that. And one way to access that is to be grateful and to catch ourselves doing something right, catching others do something right, instead of focusing on what's wrong and bringing that into our energy, into our consciousness, that we can control our consciousness by saying no to the negative and yes to the positive. And once again, we're coming back around to creating this possibility of embracing everything, but we can let go, or we can say no to some things and yes to others. And this is what volitional effort is, the effort of attention. So if I choose to have my mind on gratitude, I have gratitude on my mind. And I'm inviting greatness, creating a great mind and attracting greatness to me.